and welcome to Things We Said Today, our weekly podcast in which we discuss all things Beatles. Beatles as a group, Beatles as soloists, their past, their present, their future, this week their current stuff. I'm Alan Cozen, and I'm joined by my regular co-hosts, Ken Michaels, who you probably know as the host of the syndicated Beatles radio show, Every Little Thing. Ken, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Nice to hear from you, Alan.
Great. And Steve Marinucci, who everyone reads on the internet pretty much all day long because he's constantly posting Beatles news on Access, which is AXS.com, and Billboard, regular contributor to Billboard now. I don't think Billboard has had so much Beatles coverage in its entire history as it had in the last several weeks. And Al Sussman, the executive editor of Beatle Fan. How you doing, Al?
Hey, Alan, how you doing? Hello there, everybody.
Okay. And gosh, is like anything going on this week with the Beatles? Yeah. So, okay, we're going to talk mostly, I guess, about 8 days a week, which we probably have all seen between us about, 50 times. I think we've ended up.
Something like that.
And which opened last Thursday as we speak. Today's recording this on Monday the 19th. It opened on the 15th in theaters. Some theaters, limited run. Some theaters have had it only for a day. Some are having it for a week. And then immediately premiered on Hulu on Saturday the 17th. So we've had a chance to look at it, and you'll be surprised to hear that we have opinions. And
really?
Yeah.
No way.
But also, it turns out that we should ask Steve how his version of it went, the live version, because he actually hosted a live screening of it. So, how was that, Steve?
It was very nice. It was at the Elmwood Rialto Theater Rialto Elmwood Theater in Berkeley, California. It was a full house. I even gave away 2 copies of Pure McCartney, the 2 CD version. And that was fun, but everybody enjoyed it. There were a lot of, and we'll get into the various spots in the film, but there was a lot of applause and surprise at the clips. I mean, a lot of people obviously were not familiar with as many of the clips as we were, but everybody enjoyed it. There was clapping at the end of the film. Everybody was pleased. And the Shea Stadium footage went over very, very well. That went over very well. But everybody really loved it. The theater personnel were wearing white T-shirts with the poster of the movie on it. For those of you that are interested in collectibles, and there were little mini posters and one sheets, the big posters. And they actually asked me to sign theirs, which was kind of cool, and I did. But little old me. But it was a fun evening. My wife and my son went with us, and it was great. Yeah, we had a great time. Berkeley is not real close to me. It's a drive, but I've spent a lot of days in Berkeley when I used to go record hunting there. Yes.
So what did hosting it entail? Did you have to talk about the film beforehand, or
no, we didn't talk. I didn't talk about the film beforehand. All I did was introduce it and say and tell and let everybody know, warn everybody not to leave after the credits. Although there was the little warning at the beginning of the show, at the beginning of the film, to tell everybody about it. But I did tell them not to leave, that there was more to come. Although a couple of people did leave. That was kind of weird. I guess they didn't either didn't care, or they didn't catch the thing at the notice at the front of the movie. But yeah, I mean, most everybody stayed for the Shea And a lot of people stayed around at the end, and we talked about, there were a couple of people that had been to Candlestick, a couple of people that had been to the Cow Palace, that had seen the Beatles. I think there was one person there that had been to the Hollywood Bowl. So we got, we had a few people that had actually been to a couple of the shows and could talk about that. So that was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Great.
Did you find there was a mixture of different ages? Just curious.
Yes. Oh, yes. There were. It was mostly older, an older crowd, but there were some kids. There were a few kids there because there's nothing really in the film that, to push people. It wasn't really an adult film at all. It was for all ages. So.
Mm-hmm.
In Portland, it was largely an older crowd.
Mm-hmm. Same in Pittsburgh.
Was it full? Were the shows?
Portland was mostly full, not entirely. It was only one night here. When we got there, they said that they had sold half of the largest theater in the complex. So obviously there were a lot of last minute walk-ins, people who hadn't reserved their tickets in advance. I think we were I don't have to think we were definitely the first people there. But
really,
yeah, and it turned out that the second person there, or the third after me and my wife, was a fan of the show, which was nice.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
I did when they introduced me, they did mention the show, and I also mentioned it during my little speech at the end. So,
yep.
Words getting around.
And Ken,
yeah.
How was the audience where you were?
For the most part, I would say it was about 2/3 full, and the age, probably the people there were about from their 40s on up. I didn't really see anybody younger than that. But I also noted that on that night, on Thursday, that theater had about 4 or 5 screenings of it the same night. So it's not as if everybody had to rush to one screening. So it was probably spread out throughout the whole evening.
Mm-hmm.
And in the theater that I went to, this was in Pleasantville, the Jacob Burns Art Cinema, and they're running it for a full week. So anyone who really wants to see it on the big screen has a week to do it. But obviously, to see Shea, it had to be that first night.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know it was only the first night. I thought that in the theater at all it was whenever.
No, it's the whole screening, Ken.
No, I was told that it was just the first day.
No. No. It's supposed to be the word when they announced it was going to be for the entire screening, because I saw it on Friday, which is the second day. So
okay.
I see the makings of a class action suit against the theater in Pleasantville.
Indeed.
Yeah, really. But yeah, it's every night.
It wasn't the theater that said that. I thought I read it online. So.
Well,
don't
so much.
blame the theater.
Don't blame the theater. Don't blame the theater.
Okay. We take it back. Okay, so I guess we should talk about what our reactions to this film were. Shall we start with Steve, since we started there last time?
Like I said, I saw it. I had it streamed to me a week before, so I had seen it before I went to the theater. And to be honest, my reaction was kind of ho hum. There a lot of the footage was stuff that I had seen before, and I wasn't really excited about it. When I got to the theater, though, to see it at the theater was a different experience. It really worked better for me up on the big screen, seeing the impact of the Beatles on the big screen, the footage. Actually, that particular night when I went in, they had showed the Shea Stadium stuff in a smaller theater. We got my screening had the biggest theater in the theater, and I did see the Shea Stadium stuff close up, and the impact was amazing. My mouth dropped. I was floored by how good the Shea Stadium stuff looked. Never mind the fact that with the 4K restoration and the blow up on the big screen, it looked a little grainy. I didn't care. I thought it looked. Was really pleased. And not only that, the listening to Ringo sing "Act Naturally," warts and all, was wonderful. I thought that was fantastic.
I'm glad they kept that in there, the real version.
Yeah, right. So yeah, same here. I meant to do it today and see how much of the overdubbing was taken out, but I believe a lot of the overdubbing was taken out, especially at the end with "I'm Down."
Except that in Twist and Shout, they actually put the record version in under the.
Yes,
so,
I was. Yeah, I noticed that too. You couldn't help but notice that, and I wondered why the hell they did that, because I was listening to one of the bootlegs yesterday, and it didn't sound that bad. Why did they do? I don't know why they did that. That was the only song they did that to.
Yeah.
I was really amazed. I was really surprised at that.
Now, it's been said, and I didn't notice it myself, but I think Al did, and other people have, that they flew in some of George's lead guitar filigree and "Act Naturally" and added that.
Yeah, and I think also there were some elements of the studio recording, even in on "Babies in Black," because parts of it just did not sound live.
Somebody online said that they thought they heard a acoustic guitar. I didn't, but I think somebody else mentioned that online. But they obviously did a little bit of messing with the sound.
Yeah.
But still, the theater I was in did not have a really distinct stereo. I don't know how you guys heard it, but mine didn't have a really distinct stereo sound system.
Not really, no.
So, which I was kind of hoping for, but it still sounded great.
What you got in stereo was the fans, some of which was also apparently flown in from Hollywood Bowl. And
really?
No, it's what I've heard. Yeah, and also you got a little stereo effect on the very heavy reverb that Giles Martin added, and I believe his license should be suspended because this is the second production where he's added reverb that really wasn't necessary to the sound of something, and someone needs to give him a talking to.
But other than that, I thought the movie looked great, and then I watched it again today. And if you watch it and just listen to the dialogue in a kind of a serious manner, there's kind of a darker meaning there. And that doesn't come through in the footage. And I was thinking, if they had gone through with this and really made it a real documentary, which I'm going to say it's not, but if they had made it a real documentary and made it a little darker, I think it would have been a little bit more effective. Not that it isn't bad, but I think it would have made the point a lot better, because it was supposed to be about the touring years, and even the title 8 Days a Week indicates that this was an incredible, monstrous thing on them, to have to, all those years, and it just comes off very lightly with the Beatlemania footage and all that stuff. And
I don't know. I thought it really kind of captured the claustrophobia that they felt touring. And the only other, we've all read tons and tons of books and, seen lots of documentaries. And the only other thing that I thought captured that claustrophobia quite that way was Bob Spitz's book. Pretty much the only thing I can say, on behalf of Bob Spitz's book is that it really, really captured how boring and, just hard for them being cooped up and, all of that. And the film showed more of that than we usually see. It didn't really begin to emerge till the 65 section. They start saying that George is already beginning to complain. And I think I don't know that they could have, I don't know that Apple, in an official Beatles project could have made it much darker than it already is in this. I think enough was conveyed, to give you a sense of how wearing this was on them. And I think that it's as far as they'd be willing to go.
Yeah.
You know.
I saw a quote from Ron Howard where he said he didn't want to project the darker side of the tours, even though some of that is captured anyway. I mean, look at 1966 and how they went into detail on that. But I think that it really captured all the different angles of touring and everything they were doing because they were so active during those years. So, on that level, I think they really succeeded, taking it not only from the Beatles angle but from the fans.
Mm-hmm.
The mania part of it all. I
Right.
think it captured all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for a 90-minute documentary, it did a really pretty good job. And the more I watched it, which I think I saw it 4 or 5 times, the more I kind of enjoyed it. Really, I mean, I got a little less critical. The first time I went through it, I was sort of very critical of because I was very looking for really, why is that colorized, and that kind of stuff, and making note of all of these things and of missed opportunities, and of which I thought there were quite a number.
I was going to ask about the missed opportunities because I saw your comment about that.
Yeah, just to choose one. Okay, Candlestick Park. Candlestick Park, if you blinked, you almost would have missed the whole thing. You heard more about the truck that they were sliding around on, and and now we have footage of Candlestick Park. I mean, in addition to the new stuff they found, from some woman who apparently had it under her bed undeveloped. There's newsreel footage, and there's Tony Barrow's cassette, which, given that he's, it's not super fidelity, but he's standing near the stage, not in the audience, so you actually can hear the performance. This is a really historical performance because it's the last one. I would have wished that they had maybe given us some of that performance. In addition, I don't know, I could swear I've seen photos of these things, but at least, heard about them. The two things about Candlestick Park that kind of really put the final stamp on it is that first of all, that they asked Tony Barrow to do it, and if someone could have found a photo of Tony Barrow standing there with his cassette recorder, that would have been nice. I can't remember whether I've seen such a thing or not, and I think I've seen a picture of the Beatles taking the selfie, and not to mention, there is the selfie itself that since the Beatles took it, presumably one of them has it. The fact that they never brought cameras on stage and shot anything, but for this they did, and they shot a selfie. I kind of think that, like, if that was shown, that would have made it, I think, a bit more poignant, plus a bit of the performance. So it's that kind of thing I mean when I say missed opportunity, because what you got instead is, we got to Candlestick Park and we were in a truck and we sloshed around. We decided we didn't like it anymore. Yeah,
I was surprised that they didn't put more emphasis, when you considering the fact that there was their last concert.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that they kind of went through it as quickly as they did. And yes, I mean, there is that, that John Lennon selfie that he took.
Yeah.
And that didn't appear anywhere. And even though only a couple of the Jim Marshall photographs.
Right.
So it's like they did give it short shrift.
Yeah. And at the other end, we've got those Hamburg recordings, which, not to mention a gazillion photos from Hamburg. They just showed a little bit, and it was kind of conflated with early Liverpool,
That's one thing that I would love to be able to ask either Ron Howard or any of the producers is, why did they really not spend that much time at all on Hamburg? Because those were such important years in developing the band. That's where they became a great live band. And even if all you had, for the most part, were still photos, that's still something, just in terms of its historical importance.
Well, except that it is called the touring years.
That's true.
And really, during that period, they were just doing those seasons at the Star Club or at the Cavern or wherever. They didn't really begin to tour until the beginning of '63. And another and actually, to kind of counterbalance what Alan was just saying, I was very surprised at how quickly they went through 63. And there's very little footage at all from 63. It's now I realize that there's obviously no footage from those early tours, and most of the TV shows, at least the ones that still survive, are really just lip syncs. But there's the Swedish drop-in show, when you have about 5 seconds of them bowing
right
at the end of that. And I mean, that's one of the probably one of the best performances of theirs on video. And we didn't get, even a little sliver of that.
I was curious with some of the people that they had talking, they used for comments. I mean, Whoopi Goldberg's comments were really good, I have to say. But I kept looking at Richard Curtis, and I'm going, where the hell have I seen him before? I had to look him up in IMDb. He's the producer of Pirate Radio, which of course, tells a lot about the 60s era Radio Caroline and stuff. So that's where he comes in. But still, I mean, some of the, I guess the natural thing to do when you have these documentaries and these talking heads is to figure out, what their connection is to the whole thing. I was surprised, going back to missed opportunity, I was surprised they glossed over Philippines. I mean, that was a major, that was probably the worst moment they'd ever had, and they just barely talked about it. And another thing I noticed was did you notice they played Good Day Sunshine over the protests, which I thought was, what are they, what? I mean, yeah, it was kind of awkward. I mean, I did, I mean, it was good. I mean, somebody early on looking to make a comment very quickly online called it Anthology Light. I don't think that's...
not at all.
Not at all. So that, especially after seeing it a couple of times, but no, it was.
On the other hand, complete Beatles heavy could be.
Right.
Work.
Right.
It was a little bit like the complete Beatles in a way, In
a way, although the one thing that I don't understand is why, considering that there's an Apple-sanctioned collection of their appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show, why they used a clip that's probably about the same quality as what Alan and I were trading in the early 80s when we were trading videos.
That was surprising, yeah.
That's the thing. Maybe one of you can talk about this from a technical standpoint, but there are certain things like Ed Sullivan, like Shea Stadium, where you've seen cleaner prints now. I mean, the Shea from Anthology, to me, was brighter, so clear, and yet it's grainier on the big screen. Maybe it's just because it's on the big screen.
That might be.
I think so.
What seemed to be the case with Shea is the graininess changed depending what they were showing. I mean, the pictures of the fans were spectacular, and because the cameraman could get right up there. With the pictures of the Beatles, those were sort of zoomed in and they became grainy, I think, that way, they were enlarged afterwards. And I think that took a toll that we don't see on a smallish screen, but on the big screen, I think you could see what was going on a bit more in that way, that it lost some quality. But yeah, I mean, it's still, in terms of the color and everything, it really did look incredible. So,
it really did.
And it did kind of give me an Anthology feel to it, though, because let's face it, where John and George are concerned, there are limited interviews,
right,
and dealing with this particular subject. And with George, they kept going back to the Anthology,
right.
So, kind of reminded me a lot of the Anthology for that reason.
Yeah,
except that it was faster paced, much faster paced.
Oh yeah,
than the Anthology. And I think that may be part of the problem. I think they, between that and having the kind of contemporary celebrities and things like that, obviously, Ron Howard, in every interview that I've either seen or heard with him, said that he had to, keep, walking this fine line between chaos and creation. There you go again. Between, making a film for the hardcore fans and making a film for the, if you want to say it, the millennials, and making a film for the millennials, they have to, presumably because of the lack of attention span that a lot of them have, you have to speed it up.
Right.
Yeah.
So that
I think he may have walked the line between the millennials and the hardcore fans, but I don't think he was ever on the side of the line where the hardcore fans are.
I
because
agree.
In what respect?
Even, I would say that there was maybe 5 minutes of stuff we haven't seen. There was a bit more stuff that we haven't heard. I mean, they brought in a bunch of studio outtakes that we heard partially.
I love those. I was sitting there thinking afterwards. I was going, God, they could do 2 hours of that. That would have been amazing. To really. Put some do some work on that studio material and put that in the theater in a good sound system.
And some of those Larry Kane radio actualities, not the interviews, because the interviews he's put those out, but there were some radio actualities from reports of his that at least he says he doesn't even have, and he has no idea where they came from.
Those were good. I mean, you've got Larry Kane right in 1964, 65, and I think it was a 64 section saying he was reporting on the dangers that they face while traveling. It's like now we look back at it as being, like that, but he was reporting that right at the time. This is dangerous for these guys. And I thought that was a good little clip. Lots of other good little, a lot of the interesting stuff and the stuff that maybe collectors hadn't seen was more to do with things like press conferences and things like that Kane clip than performance footage. I mean, there was a little bit of performance footage from, the handheld things that, that we hadn't seen, but they only showed 10 seconds at a time, and in terms of, our perpetual debate about, hardcore fans versus newcomers, I mean, first of all, I didn't really see any newcomers in the theater, but maybe that's for Hulu. But second, you were mentioning about the Sweden show and how little we got of that. Well, I think you don't have to be a hardcore fan, like showing a clip, a full performance of at least one song from that show would have served newcomers really well, better than
no question.
So it's not even, I think, that hardcore fans, just want to see stuff that we haven't seen before. It's not just that. It's like, okay, use the material that you have, even if we already know it, in the best way it can be used, rather than just sort of clip through it and Sweden. So we can point to it and say Sweden, and a newcomer may not know it, but that doesn't help anybody. It's like you want to see those performances because they were hot.
Right. Although
Washington Coliseum was hot, but it was just sort of annoying seeing it in color.
Yeah.
Why did you feel that way?
Although.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up too, because I didn't think, as much as I hate colorized stuff, the color in there didn't bother me.
It didn't bother me actually either.
And
actually, Blackpool Night Out was in color.
That's right. There were a number of things. The press conference at Kennedy was colorized.
Right.
The NME 1964 was colorized.
Right. I mean, I hate colorized movies for the most part, but the color stuff, the Washington stuff looks so good. I mean, man, that was just great to see. And they also, you could tell, had worked on the sound on that too. It sounded so good in the theater.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have, I would be the first one to complain about colorized, but in this particular case, they did such a good job on those. Oh God, it looked really good.
Yeah. To Alan's point about about increasing the amount of the music, I did hear an interview on another Beatles podcast last week with Nigel Sinclair, who said that he had tested out various prints of the film for people, and at least in one of them, the feeling was that there was too much music.
Really?
So yeah. So that's why they may have cut back on things like the drop-in show, or the Washington Coliseum, where we only get one song.
That's really something.
Yeah.
I mean, if I wanted to see a documentary about a musician that didn't have any music in it, it should be Andrew Lloyd Webber.
You're hinting for that man, I tell you.
Very good, Alan. That was a great way to dig that in there.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's hard for me. It's hard for me to understand this about a millennial or a new fan. You're talking about a lack of attention span. Those Beatles songs from that time were 2 minutes long.
Yeah.
So I
That's
mean,
right.
how can they not sit through 2 minutes? Would that be just requiring too much of them? But the question is, how many of those songs would you allow in a documentary? And really and truly, an hour and a half really flew right by in the theater.
Did,
I couldn't believe how quick. As soon as I was really getting into it, it was over. So, but I think one of the things which is, I shouldn't really call it a disappointment because I really enjoyed the film. But from the very start, when this was originally called the Beatles Live Project, and Apple was soliciting from fans material that we hadn't seen before, we were of the impression that this would be mainly a lot of live performances that, a lot is either very rare, hasn't been seen, or, stuff that has been around and probably in the best quality all mixed together. But this really was, the strength of this film really comes from the narrative of it and telling the story through all the different interviews. And I really enjoyed Paul and Ringo's current interviews mixed with archival interviews and all the different celebrities that they mixed together as well.
I would love to know where they changed what made them change their focus from what we were expecting to what they ended up with.
Another one of the concepts of, if you remember, one of the, I guess probably the original concept when they were soliciting all of that fan footage was that this was supposed to be fairly heavy with fan reminiscences, and there was very little of that. And we were talking before we began recording that I have a strong hunch that if we had an hour and a half of George has sexy eyelashes and I'm gonna love Paul McCartney when I'm 110 years old, an hour and a half of that probably would have made people's heads explode after about 15 minutes.
Well, yeah. I mean, if they were recording, I mean, they did a whole bunch of recordings, interviews at Candlestick Park, were at the McCartney show. They could have edited that down. In fact, I know somebody who was interviewed there who also showed up at the Berkeley screening and told me, that
Nancy Guida?
Yeah, and it looks like Nancy's going to be part of the DVD extras, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I mean, I think they're saving some of that for that. But it's a shame that more of that wasn't used. I mean, it would have been nice to have, fans in there too a little bit. But what can you say?
I think we had just enough of that, and it was contemporary. I mean, I liked seeing. I get a kick out of seeing these little girls in 1964 going nuts, but I don't know that I'd want to see them today talking about how they went nuts, unless of course there's Sigourney Weaver. That's a different story.
Right.
But
and
I was just going to say one thing. When I don't know how it was with you guys, but when the Sigourney Weaver clip came on in the theater, you could hear all these. A lot of people were not aware of that, and it had a lot of people surprised.
They
Go
could
ahead,
have
Ken.
put a little circle or an arrow or something, because I think it went past a lot of people. I think
Really?
there were people who didn't quite realize that was her, as a
Yeah.
kid.
I thought it was her, but it went by so quickly that I questioned it,
Hmm.
But in the theater where I saw the film, one thing that kind of disturbed me about this, and I had my wife with me, who's a first-generation fan, who saw the Beatles in concert in 1966, a lot of the people in the audience were laughing at the girl screaming and fainting, and they couldn't really understand it. They couldn't relate to it. And since a lot of them were in their 40s and up, and some of them I'm sure were first-generation fans, I'm kind of surprised that they had that kind of a reaction to it.
Well, there is kind of a there is kind of a quaintness to it.
Yeah, it's a bit zany.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
and especially I keep thinking of the blonde girl there in the Shea footage, who's looks kind of glum. I mean that was kind of funny. And then the girls climbing up on the fence, kind of going, you could see what they were mouthing, Paul, John, I mean that was funny. I think it was, Ken. I mean their reactions were a little over the top, shall we say? But no, I didn't see a problem with that. I didn't. But Joanne did, huh?
Yeah, because she lived through all that, and she felt that way. I mean, she didn't go overboard like those girls, but she understood why they felt the way they did.
I think looking back, I think a lot of people are somewhat amused by that now. I mean, they realize what it was them at a younger age, but on the same note, there were also people who I heard Nancy was one of them who watched the movie and were very struck by what they saw because they related to it so well. So on that note, I mean it hit people in different ways. You have to say that. So
I wanted to bring up one of the people that were interviewed. One of the people that was interviewed was Ed Freeman, who was one of the roadies.
Yeah. Which I never knew.
Yeah.
I never knew that either.
We always heard about Mal and Neil.
Yeah.
But I looked up Ed Freeman, and he was a roadie for the Remains. So he was on the tour there for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
In '66.
Right.
And I also looked online, and there was a roadie for The Circle as well, who's not in the film. But I'm sure, I don't even know if that roadie is still alive. But it's nice that they dug up this person, and did a little bit of research and interviewed him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a little bit of new information of a sort of asterisk footnote kind of quality.
Right.
I thought they did a really nice job with dealing with Brian Epstein.
Yeah.
Yes.
And George Martin, maybe a little less George Martin because we know so much about him. And, whereas to a lot of people, Brian is still a little bit of an enigma. And I think that they handled Brian really, really well. I think I really like that quote of Paul saying that sort of he saw bigger things for us than we saw for ourselves. So, so there were a lot of little things, again, not particularly music, but just, other bits of information and things that came through. And a lot of them, the more you watch it, the more you see them,
Yeah. Did you notice, by the way, that Sid Bernstein was not in the film, either film? He did not introduce. The introduction was not in the main film, and it was not in the Shea film, which that kind of surprised me. There was the poster, the brief poster, and that was the only time you saw his name.
And he got the screen credit in Shea too.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. You're right.
I also noticed that there was no mention of Pete Best.
There were pictures. There were pictures that flashed by very quickly, but yeah, you're right.
I wanted to say one of the most interesting things that any of the people interviewed said for me, and it wasn't all that shocking, but it was very heartfelt, was when Ringo was talking about 1966 and how things really changed, and even before they toured that year, because John had already been married, and he had not only Cynthia but Julian, and Ringo had gotten married, and they had Zach, and they spent a lot of time in their new homes, and so they weren't in each other's pockets, every single day.
Right.
So they kind of grew a little bit apart, for a short time. So it gave them some space and some breathing room there before they went back and and toured again and got real busy with the recording. So I found that to be really interesting because we all know the craziness of 1966 and everything that happened to them on the road. But even before that, things were changing, certainly on the home front, which I found to be really interesting, that they had a life beyond the Beatles.
One thing that I noticed as well, just to sort of skip around topics, is in the Washington Coliseum film, when Paul asks everyone to clap their hands and stomp their feet, in the film, that cuts to John doing his, what he used to call his cripples thing,
right?
Which is very un-PC now, and they basically substituted another shot. That struck me. And the thing about that is, I mean, you can argue about whether or not that should be shown at this point. I mean, it was what he did. He did it a lot on one hand, and but on the other hand, it seemed to me that if you didn't want to show that, you should have shown another clip, because having it cut, to anybody who knows the footage, it's going to bring it to mind. Hey, John's thing is being deleted. Whereas if they just use a different song, you wouldn't have even thought about it,
And if I recall correctly, I think the same thing happens in the Shea Stadium film, with basically the same the same type of introduction. Yeah. And it just goes to a different, it just goes to a different shot.
Yeah. And again, in okay, I don't know if this counts as a lost opportunity, because they did show something from Shea in the main film. It's just, I guess, a matter of, we're all, little directors at heart. I think if it were me, I was going to show one clip from Shea, I would probably show I'm Down, because that, with John going crazy.
Right.
On that's just the one. So, yeah.
And just to see John and George crack up together.
Yeah.
And, right next to each other on stage. That's one of my favorite moments.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul twirling around,
Yeah.
Right.
There were also a lot of little things in Shea that I didn't, I don't, how many gazillion times have I watched that film that I've never noticed before, and then went back to the film and they're there. I don't know why I didn't notice them, but for instance, in A Hard Day's Night, when it gets to the bridge, John sort of like hands it off to Paul with a big hand gesture, pointing to Paul. And he does it twice when both times that they do the bridge. And for some reason, I just either hadn't seen it or hadn't noticed it, or maybe on a small screen it didn't quite register in quite that way. But up there on the big screen, I thought that was kind of a funny moment.
Well, plus also during the performance of A Hard Day's Night, in most of the prints of the show, we're kind of distracted by Brian Epstein's comments.
Right.
So maybe that.
And so
we're busy listening to that and not really watching the band.
And so because we're listening to that, we don't see as now sort of jumped out. And I looked back in the film and it was always there.
Yeah.
They showed George's guitar being a Gretsch for a little bit, which, as you see him at the beginning of the song switch to the Rickenbacker. And he plays the Rickenbacker for that song, but they use some footage apparently from another song, because at one point they sort of zoom in on the Gretsch, which is not playing in that song. So, but I had never noticed it before, but there it is. It's.
Does it bother anyone that they didn't use Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby just for the audio at the end?
Yeah, I think that they should have used that, and they should have used She's a Woman in their places in the set, and just use some of the other footage, or footage and stills, right. Or as we saw in the 8 Days a Week clip on OnePlus, they could have manufactured something that looked like they were playing those songs. But,
if they went to the trouble of digging out the Act Naturally, there was no reason not to do that. So,
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well.
Now, do they actually have footage of Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby?
No.
No.
No, there's no footage of those two songs.
Okay, I know about She's a Woman because the
Yeah.
camera stopped in the middle.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
and if they did ever have Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, as we know from our visit with Dave Schwensen, they no longer do.
Yeah.
So they would
Right.
have to use, the helicopter footage or something else, during who knows what. But whatever they used, I think it would have been nice to hear the whole set start to finish uninterrupted in the order that they played it,
Right.
So maybe that's why they're not including it in the DVD. They're waiting to hear what we have to say about this edit, so that they
Maybe.
can then do it right before they actually put it out.
Yeah.
Right.
We are the determining factor.
That's right.
Shall we pivot over to the DVD release?
Sure.
Okay.
We now
Let's
have
do that.
info about. So, what does everyone feel about the extras? Does it bother you, for instance, that we're going to get 12 minutes of performance footage with 5 whole songs only on a 2 DVD set?
It would be a little bit more enlightening if we knew where those songs come from.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just the songs themselves. I mean, which Twist and Shout from where?
Yeah.
Which She Loves You?
Right.
You which Can't Buy Me Love? Which You Can't Do That? Although I would kind of assume that's probably from Melbourne.
Right. Maybe.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's but yeah, just those 11 minutes is not.
Yeah, as George says to Lorne Michaels when he turns up to play Saturday Night Live, and Michaels explains to him that I thought if it was $3,000 for 4 of you, $750 for one would be, and George says it's a bit chintzy if you ask me. That's how I feel about this.
I don't understand the Ronnie Spector and the Beatles segment at all.
Really?
Because I mean, first of all, Ronnie's credibility is not exactly high as far as what she has to say, and also, what does it have to do with the Beatles touring? Because when the Ronettes backed up the Beatles on the '66 tour, she wasn't there because Phil wouldn't let her out of the house.
Right.
So
right, and that one of the reasons for that could have been her interaction with them during the '64 tour, which I doubt is what they're going to show us.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm
Exactly.
for sure.
Exactly.
Although that's what I mean is that Ronnie has spent many years talking about how she had this affair with John and she had this affair with George and 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 it's apparently a few grains of truth there, but not a whole lot.
And another thing, the Beatles in Japan item.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about that number for tour. It says, and also the alternative opening for the film, because Universal confirmed to me that there was an alternative edit for Japan of the film.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if that's what we're going to see, or what exactly that is. There's no real description there as to what that's going to be. So
there's also a feature for the Beatles in Australia.
Right.
Right.
So you've got Australia and you've got Japan. They're probably like a couple of minutes each, some pieces.
Yeah, Australia, you can pretty well figure what that's going to be, because that'll be all the crowds and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm real curious there. What I wish they had put a little more description on those things. Told everybody what the hell that was
an interview with 3 Beatles fans.
Yeah.
We're all waiting for that.
Right.
I really, I mean, obviously, I just sort of wish that it was, first of all, Shea, but maybe some other performance stuff. To have it limited to 11, 12 minutes is just sort of like a head scratcher.
Yeah, especially if the decision had been made to not put as much music in as they originally planned. Okay, fine, then put more in the bonus features. And that apparently is not the plan, because especially the the longer form pieces, the music, words and music segment, and the special feature touching on the Beatles as a collective, don't appear to have much in the way of music.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very strange.
So, Alan, are the Beatles and Mozart comparable in the amount of great melodies?
In the amount of, I don't know. It's a different thing, but I thought he was a little hard on Schubert, actually, saying that only 100 of his 800 songs were. Really, the Beatles only. Their total official output is only a bit more than 200 songs, right? And some of those are covers. So I don't know what in terms of this big explosion of invention that he's talking about. I'm not sure how that compares to people who've written, close to 1,000 things. But his point was well taken, which is that there's hardly any bad Beatles stuff. Everything they did, was inventive and memorable. And by the way, during that little clip where they go from Sgt. Pepper to Let It Be, to say, and then they put out a bunch more albums, and then they played on the rooftop. They basically chose sort of one selection or less from each album. And for the White Album, it was, folks, Revolution 9.
Okay. That's your influence, Alan.
Wow.
Oh, I see. Well, I was actually very pleased to hear that.
I'll tell you one thing that kind of bothered me is that, we're looking at the Beatles as a live act around the world, and throughout this documentary, in the bottom right corner, it would keep giving you the Beatles albums and their chart performance in the UK. And Please Please Me was #1 for 30 weeks. And all that's great. But that doesn't mean that that's how it was in the rest of the world. And even in America, if you grew up with the American albums, you couldn't relate to Please Please Me. You're only talking about how well it did in the UK.
And yet the film itself was very, very U.S.-centric.
Right.
Yeah. That's a
and
good
people
point.
in other countries are complaining about that.
Really?
Yeah.
Especially in England, they should.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a sense, even in some of the promotional interviews that Ringo, Paul, and Ron Howard did. They haven't gotten very far, but a few people have asked, they were from Liverpool. How come Liverpool is, not really dealt with an awful lot? And they sort of glided over the answer for that. But yeah, and in terms of, can American charts were dealt with in the February 64 section, where you've got George talking about how they've got 5 songs at #1.
That's true.
Right.
And John says Big Head. However, they show I Want to Hold Your Hand at #1, and it's it's kind of a fake thing. It's not like an actual Billboard or Cashbox page, because it gives the wrong number for the single. It gives capital 5150, which is the number for Can't Buy Me Love. It should be 5112. My father was right. I am a cesspool of useless knowledge.
Is that what he told you? Oh,
yes.
Okay.
He said it with a smile, however.
Okay.
And once again, Paul told the story how the Beatles wouldn't come to America unless they had a #1 hit, which, I've tried to defend him right and left. And I don't know if I can even do it anymore, because sometimes I think he means they wouldn't tour America until they had a #1. But if he's referring to being on Ed Sullivan, that was all booked before the single.
Yes, as Ringo points out, taking up George's role in the anthology. In the anthology was George. He says, it's a good thing because we happen to be booked to go there.
Right.
And this time Ringo followed up by saying, "Yeah, and we were booked to go on Ed Sullivan and all of that." So that Paul says that, and it's also in both the anthology and this. It's immediately countered with the sort of reality.
How do you all feel about the way the whole segregation issue was handled? Because they certainly have brought that up in many of these interviews, that it's a big point about their touring and the stand that the Beatles took in Jacksonville.
I thought that was good. I thought that was good, actually. I was very pleased with the fact they did that. It kind of went against the not so serious tone of most of the rest of the movie, but I'm glad they did that. I'm very glad they did that.
Yeah.
Although there is one little thing that there's a clip of Larry Kane saying that they're not sure if the Beatles will play this concert in Jacksonville. It wasn't because of the segregation situation. It was because there was a hurricane,
right,
that nearly prevented them from flying into Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. So, it kind of conveniently dovetails.
Yeah.
Right.
But and frankly, we really didn't know about the that clause until basically Chuck Gunderson unearthed it in his research for Some Fun Tonight.
Right.
I think it was out a little before that, but yeah, I think a lot of people,
it's been recent.
Right. I think a lot of people learned about it recently, but
yeah. So I'm not sure about the context of the the contemporary interviews from '64 with Paul talking about segregation. I don't know whether he was being directly asked about Jacksonville or what. So it is kind of creative revisionism, if you will.
Yeah, there was a bit of that, a bit of messing with chronology to make things work. But I think in terms of that as a point, I think it was an important thing to mention because also, otherwise it's like Steve sort of said, it's there's a lot of frivolity going on to do with the Beatles tour and all the screaming and the hair and whatever. And this is this was serious stuff. And so I was glad that they made as big a deal of it as they did, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
do you guys remember it getting coverage at the time when that happened?
No. I don't remember
not
at all.
Not at all.
I was like 9 or 10, so
yeah.
I'm not sure I would have known.
I was a little older than that, but
I was 14, and I was already a news hound, and I don't remember getting any coverage, at least not in New York. Maybe down south, but certainly didn't get any in New York.
Mm-hmm. And that Florida concert thing would have definitely gotten coverage down there, but I don't remember hearing that back then.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to mention one thing here, which I think will disappoint all of you, and that is that at the very end of the film, when they have the credits and they're listing all the songs that were used, apparently we have the wrong title of the Beatles song that we use in our show, because it says that the name of the song is "Thing We Said Today." So we're going to have to change the name of our show, I guess.
It's a thing we said today.
Well,
it actually says that if you look.
Oh, I'll have to watch it for a sixth time.
Oh, my God. Can I interject some news here, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For this is about the Beatles Live at the Hollywood Bowl CD, and I deliberately kept it shielded from you guys so you could all gasp and say whatever, but it will debut at number 7 this week.
Very nice.
Okay.
It has sold. Nice. Billboard says it has sold 36,000 units, 35,000 of that being traditional album sales. And it also says the last top 10 was 2013 with On Air Live at the BBC Volume 2.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which also hit number 7. So.
I can't help but feel that if they had given us both shows complete and with less reverb, it would have zoomed to number 1.
Oh, you're not. Oh, okay. All right. Anyway.
As Jeff Jones apparently said in Los Angeles, this is why God created bootlegs.
He said
Oh,
that.
as a matter of fact, Alan, I did want to ask how you felt about those composites in the Shea Stadium film, the things like Twist and Shout and Act Naturally and Babies in Black and whatever else there might have been that seemed to have some live vocal and some studio instrumentation and perhaps one performance is flown in from somewhere else. And how did you feel about that?
Well, I always would prefer it to be exactly what happened. Especially since we've heard the actual recordings, and there are places that were problematic, and for the broader audience, a fix may be necessary, and that's why God created bootlegs. But I think that flying in the pretty much the whole studio version of Twist and Shout was excessive. I don't think that was necessary.
I think that was absolutely stupid, if you want to call it that. I mean, why would you allow the raw audio of Act Naturally and not Twist and Shout? Twist and Shout was not bad.
Especially because you can tell, it just like sounds it, and what. I don't know. Hey,
it had the echo. It had the studio echo in there. I mean, you couldn't miss it. From with Twist and Shout, and I thought I couldn't believe that. That really surprised me. And I mean the Act Naturally was a nice surprise, and I actually thought that was wonderful. But Twist and Shout just made me kind of shake my head a little bit. I mean, the rest of it didn't sound bad. People have said that they noticed other things added. I didn't notice that, but you couldn't miss Twist and Shout.
Yeah.
So
you know what I'd like to know most of all is between Paul and Ringo and Yoko and Olivia, how involved they were in this whole thing. Did they just give material to Ron Howard and to his staff, and then they chose what to use? Because if you follow the interview, there was one interview on Facebook in particular where Paul and Ringo are asked what they think of the film, and they hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah,
so for all that we've said,
Right.
all this time we've been saying that nothing goes out without the Beatles' approval. Here's a film, and Paul and Ringo haven't seen it.
Right.
And the finished product is out there. So,
but they said they did see a rough cut.
Right.
And maybe they felt that, okay, Ron Howard is an artist and who they respect, and they're trusting him. Maybe this was an example of trust, that's beyond what they normally do.
That's what they were saying, that because they were familiar with Howard's work, that they basically put it in his hands.
And they only gave him material that I guess they were comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty obvious. Because they didn't dig anything unusual up. So, but you guys want to grade it?
No.
Yeah.
I'd give it an 8.
An 8? Well, I was gonna. Okay. I think I'd go for probably a 7.5 actually. If you're gonna do it that way.
I'll give it an 8.5.
Al?
I'll be the curmudgeon and not do a number grade.
Okay.
Giving it a letter grade?
Yeah, I would give it a B+.
Okay.
All right.
So that's like a 7.5.
something like that.
Maybe 8. Yeah. Okay.
I think as a documentary, and I'm a fan of documentaries, I think actually it was done very well, but there were some problems with pacing and lack of music, especially from certain crucial points. Mm-hmm. But overall, I think it was very well done.
Okay. If you could put yourself in the mind of a new Beatle fan, like a new teenager, watching this for the first time, would it make you more curious to investigate the Beatles and their music and their history?
I would think so.
That's hard to answer because from our perspective, you'd have to just exit everything out of your mind. Probably it probably would, because their history is so unique, and the social reaction was just so crazy. It's not like Justin Bieber. It's not like, it's nothing like, One Direction. It's like none of those guys.
Well, it was 20 times greater than,
Right.
it's like a story that I've told over the years about back in the days of Total Request Live, when that was MTV's big show, and when NSYNC was the big hot boy band of the moment. And there were, there was one time there were a couple of thousand girls lined up in front of the MTV studios, and the father of one of the girls is there, and he's saying, "Oh, it's just like the Beatles." No, if it was just like the Beatles, Times Square, which is where the MTV studios, I guess, still are, would have been paralyzed. You wouldn't have been able to move in Times Square.
Right.
In fact, some of that footage is pretty scary. It really it shows you just how huge the phenomenon was.
Do you remember early in the film they had they were talking about BBC performance the Beatles were giving, and outside the building there was a line, they said a mile long to get in? A mile?
Yeah. Yep.
That's extraordinary. That's beyond extraordinary.
Yeah. But that shows you. I mean, that's just look at those scenes in Australia where or even Liverpool when they went there for the premiere of A Hard Day's Night. I mean, where the whole city turned out. It was it was just it's I thought of this when I saw the Anthology for the first time. It was like some of the footage is almost scary in the scope of the as George always put it, of the mania.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought it was also a good moment where they show Paul in 1964 being interviewed, and the question is, where do you think you guys sort of, stand in the history of the culture? And Paul says, are you kidding with that question? But that turned out to have been a really good question.
Yeah.
It couldn't be answered at the time, but we can answer it now,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Larry Kane in the film mentions something similar to the introduction that Jimmy O'Neill gave them when they appeared on Shindig, basically saying that they were the entertainment phenomenon of the century. And and I don't think there's any question of that. And seeing a film like this, I think, reinforces that.
Yeah. Okay, so this has been an awful lot of fun. I think all of us can sit here talking about this film for pretty much the foreseeable future, but it's time to go, and so we'll go around and talk about what else we've got going on, how you can contact us. Let's start with Al.
You can contact me on Facebook at Al Sussman or at Twitter at ASUSS49, or through Beatle Fan Magazine, www.beatlefan.com, or Parading Press, www.paradingpress.com, for Changing Times, 101 Days That Shaped the Generation.
And Steve?
You can contact me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I have a personal page on Facebook. I also have a Beatles news group called Beatles News and Commentary, which you're all welcome to join and comment on Beatles stories. And I also have an ebook, very, very inexpensive ebook called Meet a Monkey, Davy Jones, with my interviews with Davy Jones.
Okay, and Ken, you have, as usual, some contests going, I believe.
Funny you mention that, Alan.
Hmm.
On my website, kenmichaelsradio.com, where I have my Beatles trivia and games page, you always have one of 9 prizes to pick from every single week. And I now have the Beatles Live at the Hollywood Bowl CD as one of the 9 prizes that you could win. So there's a new contest, there's a new trivia question or game every Monday, and you have a full week to answer. And I also just want to say, because I'm doing this a little bit more often now, on a more local level, if you happen to live in the New England area, I'm giving away tickets for you to see the Fab Four in concert.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be playing at the at College Street Music Hall in New Haven, Connecticut on October the 1st. And right around the time that this show airs and gets posted, you have a week to enter to win a pair of tickets. Great cover band for Beatles music. Great musicians, as you probably know, Will Lee, Jimmy Vivino, those guys. So go to my website at kenmichaelsradio.com.
Okay. Might as well promote my books as well. I have a book called The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop, published by Phaidon. You can get it almost anywhere that sells books and happens to have it. You can also get it on Amazon. And I have an ebook published by New York Times Books, and it's called Got That Something, How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything. Both books deal with a lot of the stuff covered in the movie. And yeah, that one is also at Amazon.com. I think you can get it at iTunes as well, and wherever ebooks are sold. You can... in the ether. You can contact me at Alan Kozin on Facebook or Alan Kozin Remixed. You can also write to all of us. We have an email address, thingswesaidtodayradioshow@gmail.com, and we pretty much try to respond to comments, complaints, and suggestions. Suggestions we consider, as potential shows. So
and I should mention that when Alan is on Facebook, you never know. Sometimes he'll end up getting into a lively conversation with people, such as we had weekend before last.
That's right. That's right. It's lots of fun.
Oh yeah.
And you can follow us on Twitter at symbol Things We Said Today Fab. So for Ken Michaels, Al Sussman, Steve Marinucci, I'm Alan Kozin, and we'll see you next time.